Soft whispers can often lead to the hardest realities you will ever have to face. Experience our smooth, velvet-toned narratives that hide a sharp edge of truth and cinematic intensity. Join our community today and hit subscribe to feel every layer of the story.
I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood in my own kitchen, in the house I had paid for, and watched my daughter-in-law pour herself a glass of my sweet tea like she owned the place. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not the marriage, not the family dinners, not the pretending. All of it, every single thing I had been holding together with both hands for the past 4 years. I let it go right there, standing on my own linoleum floor, 63 years old, in my blue house robe, while she didn't even look up. My name is Henrietta May Lawson. People who love me call me Henny. I was born in Macon, Georgia. I raised 2 children by myself after my husband Raymond passed from a heart attack in 2009. I worked 31 years as a hospital administrator. I retired with my pension, my health, and a 3-bedroom house on Clover Ridge Road that I bought with cash in 2018. Not a loan, not a gift. Cash. From my own savings. Because that is what I was taught. You don't own what you're still paying for. My son Clifton was my heart. Everybody who knew us knew that. He was the kind of child who remembered your birthday without being reminded, who called you on Tuesday for no reason, who fixed things around the house before you noticed they were broken. Raymond used to say Clifton got all his best qualities, and none of his worst. I used to laugh when he said that. I don't laugh at it anymore. I just hold it. Clifton met Renelle at a work conference in Atlanta in the spring of 2020. 3 months later, he brought her home to meet me. She had long nails and a short attention span for other people's sentences. I noticed both things immediately, but Clifton was 34 years old and I had not raised him to need my permission. I smiled. I cooked. I set the table with the good dishes. 6 months after that, they were engaged. A year after that, they were married in a vineyard in Napa that cost more than my first car, my second car, and my college tuition combined. I wore a champagne-colored dress, and I danced with my son at his wedding, and I told myself the tightness in my chest was joy. It was not joy. The first 2 years were manageable. They lived in a condo in Charlotte, 40 minutes from me. Clifton called twice a week. Renelle sent me a birthday card with a gift card inside. The same Macy's gift card, the same amount, 2 years in a row, which told me she had copied the amount from the first year without remembering she'd already done it. I didn't say anything. I kept both gift cards in the kitchen drawer. I don't know why I kept them. The trouble started, or I should say, the trouble became impossible to ignore when Clifton lost his job. It was March 2022. He had been a regional sales director for a logistics company. The company restructured. He was let go with a severance package and 3 months of health insurance. He called me from the parking lot of his office building. I could hear it in his voice, not just the shock of losing the job, but something else. Something that had already been there before the phone call. Something tired. I told him to come home for a few days, just to breathe, just to get his bearings. Renelle called me 20 minutes later and told me that she and Clifton would be staying with me for a while. Not a few days. A while. She said it like it was already decided. Like she had taken my son's job loss and turned it into a housing arrangement without asking anyone. I said, of course. Your family. I meant it when I said it. I want to be clear about that. They moved in on a Saturday in April with 14 boxes, 2 suitcases, a weighted blanket, an espresso machine, and a ring light. Renelle was doing what she called content creation, which meant she walked around my house filming herself for social media while I was trying to watch my programs. She moved my good lamp into the guest room for the lighting. She did not ask. She just did it. And when I mentioned it, she said, "Oh, Henny, it looks so much better in here anyway," and walked away. I went back to my kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat down at my own table and I breathed. I was raised to be patient. My mother used to say that dignity was the only luggage you could carry into any room without being charged extra. I had carried mine my whole life. I kept carrying it. Clifton was job hunting. I could see that part was real. He was up every morning by 7, on his laptop sending applications, taking calls in the backyard. He was trying. In the evening, sometimes we would sit on the porch and talk the way we used to, and for a little while things felt close to normal. Those evenings were the reason I stayed quiet as long as I did. But Renelle, I don't know exactly when it shifted. I think it was gradual, the way water damage is gradual. By the time you see it on the ceiling, the roof has already been compromised for months. She stopped saying please. Not all at once. Just slowly. Can you get that? Became get that. Do you mind if I? Became just doing it. My refrigerator started filling with things I hadn't bought. My parking spot in my own driveway started being occupied by her car because, she said, the sun hit her side of the driveway in the morning and she didn't want her car to get hot. I started parking on the street, in front of my own house, that I owned. Clifton saw some of it. I know he did. Sometimes I would catch him watching her with a look on his face that I recognized. Not quite embarrassment, not quite apology, something caught in between. But he never said anything to her. And when I tried to talk to him about it, gently, carefully, the way you talk to a grown man you raised, he would get very quiet and then he would say, Mom, she's just adjusting. And I would nod because I loved him, and I would go back to my kitchen, and I would breathe. The espresso machine broke in August. Renelle told me it was my fault because the water in my house had too much mineral content. She said it with a completely straight face. She then showed me a new espresso machine online that cost $460, and said it was the one she needed because it had a water filtration system built in. I bought it. I don't know why I bought it. Loneliness, maybe. Or the hope that if I kept the house comfortable enough, my son would stay the version of himself I recognized. September came. October. Still no job for Clifton. I started noticing money moving in ways I hadn't approved. Not from my accounts, I want to be accurate here, but I noticed that Clifton had started borrowing from his own 401k. He told me when I asked directly. He said they needed it for living expenses. I asked what living expenses, given that I was covering the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. He looked at the floor. I found out later it was credit card debt. Renelle's credit card debt. Shopping mostly. Some of it was charged to cards he didn't know she had opened. I found this out not from Clifton, but from my daughter-in-law's cousin, who had come to visit one Sunday and said something offhand at the kitchen table that she thought I already knew. She looked at my face and she went very quiet. I excused myself and went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for a long time. That evening I sat down with Clifton alone. I told him what I had heard. He didn't deny it. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. My table. The one I had bought at an estate sale in 2015 and refinished myself with 2 coats of walnut stain. And he told me Renelle had opened 3 credit cards in the past 18 months and owed approximately $19,000 across all 3. He said they were handling it. He said it the way you say things you don't believe, but are too frightened to stop saying. I asked him what handling it meant. He said they had a plan. I asked to hear the plan. He changed the subject. I went to bed that night, and I lay in the dark and I did the math. My son had been living in my house for 7 months, rent-free, utilities-free, largely grocery-free, and somewhere in those 7 months, $19,000 had accumulated on credit cards that he either hadn't known about or hadn't stopped. I did not sleep. The holidays came. I cooked. I set the table with the good dishes again. Renelle's mother came to stay for a week, in my house, in my guest room, eating my food, and she never once offered to help in the kitchen or said thank you when she left. Renelle gave her a tour of my house like she was showing off her own property. I stood in the hallway and heard her describe my sunroom as our little reading room, and I felt something go cold in my chest. January was when things got worse. Clifton got a job offer, a good one. Sales director. Slightly better salary than his previous position. Company based in Nashville. He was excited. For 3 days he was the version of my son I had been waiting for. Lighter, laughing, sitting with me on the porch in the cold air and talking about what was next. Renelle was not excited. She did not want to move to Nashville. She had a following on social media that was, she said, tied to Charlotte. She had a community. She had a gym. She presented these things as equally weighted against a full-time salary and benefits. I listened to all of it from the other room. I had gotten very good at listening from other rooms. Clifton turned down the job. He told me at breakfast. I was standing at the stove. I had a spatula in my hand. I put it down on the counter very carefully, the way you put something down when you are afraid of what your hands might do otherwise. I said, Clifton. He said, I know, Mom. I said, that was a good job. He said, I know. I said, what are you going to do? He said, "We're going to figure it out." I went back to the stove. I flipped the eggs. I served breakfast. I sat down across from my son, who I had raised by myself, who I had driven to soccer practice and stayed up with during fevers and watched graduate from college and wept at his wedding, and I understood something that I had been refusing to understand for a very long time. He was not going to figure it out. Not while she was making the decisions. February came. Things escalated in a way I had not anticipated. I had a church friend, a woman I had known since the 90s, who came over one Saturday afternoon for coffee. We were sitting in the living room when Renelle walked through without greeting my guest and said loudly to no one in particular, "Is there any coffee left, or did you use the last of it?" My friend looked at me. I looked at my hands. That evening I told Clifton that his wife had been rude in front of company. I was measured. I was specific. I was not emotional. I said exactly what had happened and exactly why it was not acceptable. I gave him the courtesy of a private conversation. I gave him the dignity of handling it himself. He did not handle it. What happened instead was that Renelle came to find me in my bedroom the following morning. She did not knock. She opened the door and stood in my doorway and told me that if I had a problem with her, I should say it to her face and not go running to Clifton. She said some other things. Her voice was not raised. That somehow made it worse. She spoke to me in my own bedroom in my own house in the same tone you would use to address a child or a minor inconvenience. I said nothing. I looked at her. She left. I sat down on my bed and I put my hands in my lap and I thought about my mother. I thought about Raymond. I thought about 31 years of getting up at 5:30 in the morning and putting on uncomfortable shoes and managing people and managing problems and coming home and raising 2 children and never, not once, allowing anyone to speak to me the way I had just been spoken to in my own room. I made a decision. Not an angry decision, not a reactive one. I had learned long ago that the decisions made in anger are the ones you regret, and the decisions made in clarity are the ones that last. I called my attorney on a Monday. Her name is Andrea, and she has been handling my affairs for 11 years. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Henrietta, this is entirely within your rights." I appreciated that she did not try to talk me out of it or soften it. She is good at her job. I want to be clear about the legal situation because people sometimes misunderstand it. The house on Clover Ridge Road was in my name only. I had purchased it outright. There was no mortgage, no joint ownership, no legal claim from anyone other than me. Clifton and Renelle were guests in my home. Guests with no lease, no rental agreement, no financial interest in the property. Andrea confirmed everything I already knew. I listed the house the second week of February. The real estate agent, a woman named Courtney who had sold 3 houses on my street in the past 18 months, came on a Tuesday while Clifton was at a lunch interview and Renelle was at her gym. I had chosen that day deliberately. I walked through the house with Courtney and she told me what I already expected, that based on comparable sales in the area, my house would move quickly and well above the price I had paid for it. The market had been favorable. I signed the listing agreement before she left. I had already made arrangements. My sister Betty lives in Savannah. She'd been asking me to come for years. Her house has a separate guest suite that shares nothing but a wall, which she had offered me indefinitely. I had also been in contact with the property management company about a condo in a retirement community 20 minutes from Betty's house. A beautiful place, single story, a little porch facing east. I had put down a deposit in January, 3 weeks before I called Andrea because I think better when I have already started moving. I gave Clifton and Renelle 30 days' notice in writing. A letter, hand-delivered, left on the kitchen table one Thursday morning before either of them was awake. In the letter I stated clearly that I was selling the property, that they were welcome to stay through the notice period, and that I hoped they would use the time to make appropriate arrangements. I wrote it myself. Andrea reviewed it. It was legal, clear, and final. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal when Clifton came downstairs and found the letter. He stood in the doorway with it in his hand for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Mom." I said, "Good morning." He said, "What is this?" I said, "It's exactly what it says it is." He sat down at the table. He read it again. He put it down. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was 12 and had done something wrong, and couldn't figure out how to say it. That particular expression, the one that was part shame and part the hope that love would override consequence. I loved him too much to let it. He said, "Where are we supposed to go?" I said, "That's what the 30 days are for." He said, "Mom, we don't have," and then he stopped. Because he knew. He knew exactly what he had and hadn't done with the time and money and space and patience I had given him, and saying it out loud in my kitchen would have required him to say things he wasn't ready to say. I put his bowl of oatmeal on the table. I sat down across from him. I said, "Clifton, I love you. That has not changed and it will not change. But I am 63 years old. I worked my whole life for this, and I will not spend whatever years I have left being made to feel like a stranger in my own home." He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I believed him. I think the sorrow was real. But sorrow was not a plan, and a plan was what they needed. Renelle's response was different. She did not come to me with sorrow. She came to me with fury, 3 days after the letter, in the hallway, pointing her finger, telling me I was destroying their lives, that I had done this to hurt her specifically, that I was the reason their marriage was under strain. I let her finish. Then I said very quietly, "This is my house. I don't owe you an explanation." And I walked past her to my bedroom, and I closed my door and I sat down and I breathed. They were out in 26 days, not 30. 26. I don't know exactly what arrangements they made. I didn't ask. They took their 14 boxes and their suitcases and the espresso machine and the ring light and the weighted blanket. They did not take the lamp they had moved. I found it in the guest room closet. I brought it back to the living room where it belonged. The house sold in 11 days on the market. Over asking. I signed the closing papers in a conference room downtown on a Wednesday morning. I wore the same pantsuit I had worn on my last day of work. I signed my name, which is Henrietta May Lawson, in full, on every line. I had worked 31 years to write that name on a deed, and I wrote it one final time to let it go, and it felt like exactly the right thing. I moved to Savannah on a Friday in April. Betty had made my room up with the quilt I had given her 15 years ago, the one our mother had made. She had sweet tea in the refrigerator and red velvet cake on the counter, and she hugged me for a long time without saying anything. Sometimes the people who know you best are the ones who understand that the right thing to do is not say anything. My condo was ready 6 weeks later. I moved in on a Saturday. The porch faces east. In the morning the light comes in long and gold across the floor, and I drink my coffee and I watch it, and I am quiet in a way I had forgotten I was allowed to be. Clifton called me in June. He was in a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, back at work. A different company, entry level, less money than before, but a start. He said Renelle had gone to stay with her mother for a while. He said it carefully, the way you say things when you haven't decided yet what they mean. I didn't push. I said I was glad he was working. He said he missed me. I said I missed him too. Neither of us mentioned the letter. Neither of us needed to. He came to see me in August. He drove down on a Saturday and we sat on my east-facing porch and I made us both sweet tea and we talked for 4 hours about everything and nothing. Raymond, old neighbors, a memory of a vacation we took to the Outer Banks when he was 9, and it rained for 3 days straight and we played cards and ate takeout and he said it was the best trip of his life. I had forgotten that trip. He hadn't. I thought about that for a long time after he left. Before he drove away, he stood by his car and he said, "Mom, I should have said something sooner, about a lot of things." I said, "Yes," not to hurt him, just because it was true. He nodded. He got in the car. He drove north. I went inside. I put the glasses in the sink. I stood in my kitchen window and looked out in my little backyard. My fence, my bird feeder, my patch of garden that was just beginning to take. I had planted it the week I moved in. Nothing dramatic. Just some roses, a little lavender, some cone flowers along the back edge. My mother used to say that the things you plant when you have no reason to hurry are the things that grow the most beautiful. I think about that most mornings now, on my east-facing porch watching the light come in. I am 63 years old. I have my pension, my health, my name on a deed. I have a quilt from my mother on the bed and sweet tea in the refrigerator and a son who is learning, slowly, the things I could not teach him by giving him everything. I am not angry. I was never really angry. I was never really angry. I was just finally completely done. And sometimes done is the most loving thing you can be. There's a lamp sitting in my living room right now that used to belong in this exact spot before someone moved it without asking. I brought it back the day they left. I put it exactly where it had always been, by the window, facing east. That was the first thing I did. Not cry, not sit down. I just put the lamp back where it belonged. I have thought a lot about what happened in that house on Clover Ridge Road. Not with bitterness. I want to be honest about that. Bitterness would mean I was still living inside it, and I am not. But I have thought about it the way you think about a long illness after you've recovered. Carefully, with some distance, trying to understand what the body was telling you the whole time you were too busy to listen. What I know now is this. The moment I started parking on the street in front of my own house, I had already made a choice. I just hadn't admitted it yet. I had chosen to absorb the discomfort rather than disrupt the peace. And I told myself that was patience. That was grace. That was love. But there is a version of patience that is really just the slow surrender of your own dignity. And it doesn't become noble just because you're quiet about it. Clifton is a good man. I have to keep saying that because it's true and because it matters. But good intentions without the courage to act on them are just feelings. He saw what was happening. He saw his wife take over a space that wasn't hers. He saw me shrink. He saw it. And he said, "She's just adjusting," because that was easier than saying what needed to be said. That is not a character flaw so much as it is a failure of nerve, the kind that comes from never having been asked to stand firm on anything that cost him something real. That is what I had done wrong. Not loving him too much. Loving him in a way that never required anything hard from him. I paid for his comfort so thoroughly that when the moment came that required him to be uncomfortable, he had no practice. I had made sure of that. And Renelle, I don't carry anger for her either. Not anymore. She walked into a house where every door was already open and every objection had already been softened, and she did what people do in that situation. She expanded to fill the space available. That is human nature. The door should never have been that wide. What I had to learn, and I was 63 years old learning it, which should tell you that it is never too late and never too early, is that the clearest form of love is the kind that holds a line, not a cruel line, not a punishing one. A line that says, "This is who I am, this is what I will accept, and the fact that I love you does not change either of those things." That kind of love requires you to know yourself well enough to know what you're protecting. It requires honesty about what is actually happening, not what you wish were happening. And it requires the willingness to act when the moment comes, even when the action is hard and the people on the other side of it are people you would do anything for. I planted roses the week I moved into my condo. Nobody told me to. Nobody was watching. I just went to the garden center by myself on a Thursday morning, and I picked out what I wanted, and I came home and I put them in the ground. They are blooming now. That is what it feels like to make a decision that belongs entirely to you.